The U.S. government has the technology to
absolutely.
Infect people with fast-moving cancer.
Absolutely. Yeah. As they do with in 1997, I did the first hearing on asymmetric threats. I was the chairman of the research committee, and I focused on 4 threats. And you can read about them. The first threat was the use of drones, which nobody was using then. The second was cyber attacks, which is now a big deal. The third was EMP. People don't even know what EMP is. I was the leader of that. I wrote the EMP legislation. And the fourth was cognitive warfare. People don't understand cognitive warfare. And today our intelligence agencies trying to pretend they don't know what it is. Like, oh, we don't know what that is. Because the Russians have used it, and the Chinese, they call it Havana Syndrome.
Right.
We know what it is.
The directed energy weapons.
Directed energy weapons.
I had a hearing this week in Homeland Security, and this hasn't even become very mainstream yet, but it was about different foreign adversaries using direct energy weapons against U.S. citizens that completely incapacitate citizens of the United States. You guys might have heard of it, called Havana Syndrome. And then we went down to the SCIF, and we got a classified briefing from some of the people on the panel, and it was one of the most. I'm a former Navy SEAL, so I've traveled around the world and hunted bad guys for a long time. But I can tell you this: when I went down to that SCIF, it was one of the most terrifying briefs that I've ever been a part of. Okay, this is how brazen our enemies are becoming because of how foolish, corrupt, incompetent, and I would actually say wicked we have become.
In the 90s, up to 40% of the Air Force equipment budget was classified. In other words, it was black. It was so black that nobody knew what it was. 40% of the equipment budget in the Air Force is billions and billions of dollars. When you look at advanced research in terms of how it comes forward, usually what comes out in the public is about 20 years behind where we're at. When you look at all of the history of the United States and the way in which we built our security and military apparatus, including every other nation, that's how they operate. We compartmentalize, we separate deliberately, we break it down into small components, which is very expensive and results in a lot of duplication. But at the end of the day, you get something that is really well hidden. What we learn about the human body and brain when it has weapons applications and the research is funded by the military, don't think it's being done for medical science. The military in our country doesn't fund medical research. That's somebody else, unless it has a specific weapons application or specific use within the Veterans Administration. And Veterans Administration is often used to test new ideas, to test new concepts. So our servicemen get the experiment of war and then get the experiment after the fact. Even in the MK Ultra releases of information in the 19s, from the 60s and the early 70s, over 4,000 men and women that they admit in the U.S. military were used as experimental subjects without fully informed consent.
What's the CIA's most disturbing experiment?
They had a experiment that they did in Canada, and I am never... So many times people are like, oh, well, you must know all about this MK Ultra project. I care about the techniques and the methods and the protocols and stuff that were a result of MK Ultra. But they did this thing in Canada, and I can't remember the guy's name, but they took people coming in for just normal appointments, like I have postpartum depression or I have anxiety, and they would against their will do this thing called psychic driving. It had nothing to do with being psychic. It just meant psychic of the mind. And they would give them massive, prolonged doses of LSD. And in some cases, tape their eyes open like Clockwork Orange and play these videos in front of their face all the time. And they thought it was going to like reprogram their brain somehow. But what happened was a lot of the people had to learn how to walk again. They couldn't control their bladder. They had to learn how to control their urine and stuff like that again. Some of them lost 30, 40 years of memories from their life. And these were people who checked into a clinic for like anxiety. And this was funded by MK Ultra, and it was in Canada. And it's so well known and it's so open that even the Canadian government paid the people's families who just got wrecked because of this thing. And the other thing they did, and there's so much mind warfare stuff that we could go into, but They did this thing called Project Midnight Climax in a brothel. And these Johns would come in they're like, well, I want to spend the night with this hooker. They take them up, the hookers take them up to a hotel room. They drug these dudes with high doses of LSD. And there are mirrors in these hotel rooms with dudes watching. Like behind a mirror in the hotel room, there's scientists watching this stuff and watching what takes place. That is the most bizarre and weird thing I've ever even heard of. They could experiment with LSD on a lot of people. And they did it with soldiers, and the British Royal Air Force did this with, or British Army did this with LSD. And LSD was just like the rave of the time, because the CIA thought it might be this miracle mind control drug, because these videos were coming back from the Korean War of these Americans getting brainwashed and stuff. So they're like, there is something happening to these Americans that we don't have the technology to do. So it was a psychological arms race, or so we thought it was. It was just basic stuff. It was like very basic brainwashing stuff.
What were the results of that midnight?
Nobody knows.
No?
Nobody knows. Yeah, I think it was just studying the effects of LSD and the effects of what they call interrogative suggestibility. So, can I make you confess to stuff? Can I get intelligence out of you if you're a captured asset of some kind? And I don't think they published anything afterwards, like some after action report or anything.
Secretary of Energy O'Leary under the Clinton administration said over 500,000 Americans have been used in human experiments over 4 decades, mind control and other experiments, without their informed consent. 500,000 people they admit to, and no one's been put on trial for that. No one's been held accountable for that. I think most Americans find that highly objectionable, that no one's been held accountable for invading the very essence of who they are as human beings. That's the problem. It's been going on 40 years. It continues to today under the guise of increased security for what? If you don't have freedom of thought foundationally, what the heck are we securing, and for whom? This is really where the science of mind effects has gone over the last several decades, to that kind of precision, using any electromagnetic carrier. In fact, there's a great article produced by the U.S. Army War College. It was in their quarterly perimeters back, I think it was 98, winter of 98 or 99. But the article is easy to find. It's called The Mind Has No Firewalls, which is a reiteration of a Russian military journal talking about all the different ways, and essentially any electromagnetic carrier, whether it's the internet, television, radio, or these larger systems like HAARP, or something more directional, oriented towards an individual, can alter mental states, behaviors, even planning particular thoughts or ideas within the consciousness of individuals. Any electromagnetic carrier can be used. You can use the power grid, you can use the internet, telephone, any wireless system can be overridden with a signal. In fact, during the first Gulf conflict, the first Gulf War of Bush 1, they actually, Scottish media reported after the effects of exactly this kind of technology. And we used a project called Project Solo, where we had this plane crammed full of electronic apparatus. And what it does is it piggybacks a signal on the local broadcast. So, for instance, in that region, everyone listens to the Muslim music and prayers at particular times during the day. We could piggyback a signal that generated fear, anxiety, high stressors. And if you remember in that first Gulf War, we had the fourth largest army in the world at the time collapsing like school kids going on their first fire drill. I mean, they just gave up en masse to a handful of troops at certain times, but it was fear and anxiety that was piggybacked on the normal music going in to those regions, music that our troops weren't necessarily listening to. So it was a way to send that in, and this again is probably one of the most insidious forms of warfare when you think about it, because you can do it without any detection. I mean, you don't even have to have troops on the ground. You can use any of these mediums to influencing behavior of very large segments of the population. In fact, it was a Canadian researcher, Persinger, and I believe at Laurentian University, that talked about this in the mid-90s in a paper he published, talking about exactly that all you would have to do is create a complex signal, broadcast it over a large area, create a certain level of dis-ease or anxiety in the population, and then do something as simple as run a normal radio or television broadcast, a press release, indicting some group or some event as the source of your ills. And a certain amount of this public sentiment would then drift that direction. And as we all know in politics around the world, doesn't take much to move an issue an awful long distance. This is a kind of technology that we're talking about here in this century.
Is there any evidence that they've used these types of technologies or same things that they've used against the Iraqi military domestically against protest groups?
Well, there actually was in Great Britain in an issue dealing with public protests back in the 90s. There was a technology used. It was an infrasound device that actually scattered the crowd.
The beam produces an intolerable heating sensation, compelling the targeted individual to instinctively move.
There was another one developed that's been sold actually to the military for perimeter protection, and that was actually won the Lemelson MIT Prize in 2005. Woody Norris, who developed a method of acoustic heterodyning, where he could literally send a signal into a certain zone within an area or space where anyone walking in that zone would hear that proverbial voice in the head. But the person right next to him, outside of that zone, outside of that target zone, wouldn't hear a thing.
Hypersonic sound works by emitting two highly directional ultrasonic signals at frequencies too high for humans to hear. As these signals mix in the air, however, a column of audible sound is created. Norris envisions using his invention for everything from surround sound units to museum displays.
All of those kinds of illusionary things associated with schizophrenia, you could actually impose on someone, and they would know the difference between the artificially imposed sound signal and that proverbial voice in the head.
In your book, you talk about cyclotronic resonance. What is cyclotronic resonance?
Cyclotronic resonance, again, the idea of the brain being able to lock onto these external signals and actually begin to mirror them. This frequency following response, this idea of being able to lock onto an external signal is taught in every university that teaches psychology at a high level. And they tell you, you can calm a person by flickering light, you can agitate a person, you can create virtually any emotional state. In fact, Delgado at Yale University, starting in the 1960s, worked in this area. By the time he hit the mid-80s, he had figured out that using radio frequency energy, the stuff of HAARP, but at 1/50th of what the Earth naturally produces, which, just to put that in perspective, man produces 200 million times more radio frequency energy than the Earth produces right now around every one of us at this instant. So 1/50th of what the Earth produces is enough to influence the behavior of human beings without any kind of implanted device or mechanical or electronic device attached to a human being, just by manipulating radio frequency energy alone.
Electronic mind control research is not new. A scientific milestone in this area came in the 1960s when Dr. Jose Delgado demonstrated remote control over a charging bull. By connecting a radio antenna to electrodes inserted into the bull's brain, Delgado proved that the animal's aggressive impulses could be thwarted by electronically manipulating the bull's muscle reflexes.
Do you realize the fantastic possibilities if from the outside we could modify the inside? Could we give messages to the inside? But the beauty is that now we are not using electrodes.
In recent years, Delgado has shown that the behavior of monkeys can be altered using low-power, pulsating magnetic fields. But in these experiments, there were no antenna implants.
Any function in the brain, emotions, intellect, personality, could be perhaps modified by this non-invasive technology.
Delgado's research has so far been limited to animals.
Where we've gone from there are great leaps. And when you look at where the research initiatives are being funded by DARPA and others, it's surrounding better ways to get higher and higher resolution. And if you think about it from the standpoint of computer power and the ability to take a signal and manipulate that signal, just look at the last 30 years in terms of what's happened with computing. And this is where your resolution gets finer and finer and finer and finer, where we're not just looking at gross emotional states, but being able to hone in on specific ideas, thoughts, frameworks, and build those through a technology that the Air Force now refers to as controlled effects, overriding all of the five senses, sight, sound, all of them, overriding them so that they can create complete illusions that you can't separate from an actual memory set. So you imagine synthetic memory. What will that do to the justice system around the world? What will be evidence in 20 or 30 years? And how will you determine what was synthesized and what was really experienced? This is the nature of the technology. A lot of the research is actually even being done in terms of brain research for post-traumatic stress syndrome. How do we wipe these memories out? Now that's a pretty important technology if you think about the flip side of that. Why would you want to? And what else would you wipe out? And what else could you do with that? And who will do it and who will determine what goes in your brain, what stays in your brain? And is this the purview of governments? Is this what governments should do? You know, in terms of the legal framework for using technology that would influence human behavior, there really isn't any. I mean, if you think about it, in fact, when we went to the European Parliament on these issues back in the late 90s, that was one of the outgrowths of it. In fact, in their resolution dealing with security and disarmament, which passed, I believe it was January of 1999, is the most comprehensive document ever on security and disarmament produced by the European Parliament. One of the sections, there were actually 4 sections that dealt with HAARP, and then there was a 5th section that we were able to get into the record, which dealt with mind effects, mind control technologies, and that treaty dialogue should begin in this area, that this is an area where there is no treaty. There is a huge gap in terms of where this technology has gone, and the fact that the legal frameworks are not there to protect people on a domestic level or internationally. The Russian Duma passed resolutions in 2002 asking for the same things. The fact is the temptation to use the technology. In fact, you can go back to the politics of the technology, go back to Zbigniew Brzezinski in his book Between Two Ages, and he talked about quoting from a guy, J.F. Gordon MacDonald, a geophysicist at UCLA, and he said in that book that we would eventually get to the point where we could electronically stroke the ionosphere in just the right way to return a signal to the Earth that would change the behavior of people over huge geographic areas. This is what HAARP can do today. That system can deliver on that, but so can any other electromagnetic carrier. So you can target individuals or you can target masses of people and affect a huge segment of that population. Things like near field exposures to other signals might dampen it with some people, but on a large scale, the data shows 70, maybe as much as 80% of the population could be influenced by these external causes. The thing is, without legal framework, would the government do it? Absolutely, yes. In fact, in 2006, the Air Force, the United States Air Force, revised their protocols for human experimentation. And on page 9 of that, they actually call out who's authorized on mind control experiments. And they use those words in their document in 2006. And what they say is it has to be approved by an undersecretary of the Navy or assistant secretary of the Navy. Someone at that level is the only one, and including issues that would bring about controversies in terms of the media have to be approved at that level. But this is in the current framework of Navy protocols. The experimentation goes on. The Air Force has requests for proposals out. DARPA has contracts that have been let. They all come together under one umbrella with the idea of affecting the human operator.
Advances in artificial intelligence are leading to medical breakthroughs once thought impossible, including devices that can actually read minds and alter our brains to help treat conditions like anxiety, Alzheimer's.
But that technology raises privacy concerns. That's why Colorado passed a first-of-its-kind law aimed at ensuring our private thoughts remain private.
Are earpods that can pick up brainwave activity and tell whether or not a person is paying attention or their mind is wandering. Okay, well, you might think, fine, but even if we can tell whether a person is paying attention or their mind is wandering. You can't tell what they're paying attention to. You would be wrong.
Who has access to this technology?
Karen, everyone, believe it or not. You can buy devices on the internet right now that can, to varying degrees, decode your brain waves. And the technology being developed by the likes of Elon Musk, Apple, Meta, and OpenAI can change, enhance, and control your thoughts, emotions, even your memories. It's the dawn of a new era filled with promise and peril. If the at-home devices are impressive, those being used in the lab are even more so. Our brainwaves are like encrypted signals, and using artificial intelligence, researchers have cracked the code, identifying frequencies for specific words to turn thought to text.
That I just think it, and AI knows what I'm thinking.
Yes.
Because of the pattern of my brainwave.
Yes.
But with the benefits come risks.
It is some of the most sensitive data that you could possibly share with anyone.
Data insurance companies could use to discriminate, law enforcement to interrogate, and advertisers to manipulate. Government, too, could get into our heads and potentially alter our thoughts, emotions, and memories as the technology advances.
Nobody wants to live in a world where some of these misuses or abuses exist.
While medical research facilities are subject to privacy laws, private companies that are amassing large caches of brain data are not. And based on a study by the Neural Rights Foundation, 2/3 of them are already sharing or selling the data with third parties. The vast majority of them also don't disclose where the data is stored, how long they keep it, who has access to it, and what happens if there's a security breach. Which is why Pazowski, medical director of the foundation, led the passage of a first-in-the-nation law in Colorado that includes biological or brain data in the State Privacy Act, similar to fingerprints.
And Sean, we're also wondering, can any of these devices actually control a person's thoughts?
They have been used to control the thoughts of mice in a lab.
All right, so much to take in. Sean, thank you for that report.
What do you think? Is it a future you're ready for? You may be surprised to learn that it's a future that has already arrived. Everything in that video that you just saw is based on technology that is already here today. Artificial intelligence has enabled advances in decoding brain activity in ways that we never before thought possible. Sensors that can pick up your brainwave activity, earbuds, headphones, tiny tattoos that you can wear behind your ear. We can pick up emotional states like, are you happy or sad or angry? We can pick up and decode faces that you're seeing in your mind. Simple shapes, numbers, your PIN number to your bank account. It's not just your brain activity here that we can pick up. We can also pick up your brain activity in different places, like as your neurons fire from your brain down your arm and send signals to your hand to tell you how to type, move. All of that can be decoded through electromyography, and that's what you're seeing here is a device now in the form of a simple wearable watch that can pick up that activity. And one of the pivotal acquisitions of the field, Meta acquired this company, Control Labs, in 2019, because major tech companies are investing in helping to make these devices universally applicable as the way in which we interact with the rest of our technology. These earpods, much like the video you watched earlier, are earpods that can pick up brainwave activity and tell whether or not a person is paying attention or their mind is wandering. Okay, well, you might think, fine, but even if we can tell whether a person is paying attention or their mind is wandering, you can't tell what they're paying attention to. You would be wrong.
This is why it becomes so important to understand the novelty and the viability of neuroscience is being leveraged as weapons. We then have the use of nanoparticulate agents, aerosolizable nanomaterials that can be breathed in and disrupt blood flow or neurological network activity, that can be used as an in-close weapon, or perhaps that can be used as a more broad weapon of disruption and or destruction. We also have the capability to utilize nanomaterials to get electrodes into a head and to create a vast array of viable sensors and transmitters. This is DARPA's N-Cubed program, Next generation, non-invasive neuromodulation, utilizing these techniques and technologies to create vast arrays of implantable electrodes that need not be put into the brain surgically, that are then able to read from the brain and write into the brain remotely in real time.
Scientists have been experimenting with radio frequencies on animals' brains for decades, and the military has followed it all very closely.
Documents dating back into the early 80s, we see that the military had discussed the possibilities of mind control through radio frequency energy. The possibility is there. The military has studied it.
A 1982 Air Force report called radio frequency energy a major new research initiative and said that RF can, quote, disrupt normal purposeful behavior. A 1987 military report called for more research on RF energy as a non-lethal weapon, while pointing out that most of the existing technology is classified. In 1993, there was a big conference at Johns Hopkins University. The entire conference was classified. The agenda wasn't, and weapons using extremely low radio frequencies, or ELFs, were listed as a very attractive option.